one of the important aspects of global warming and the climatic changes that are associated with global warming is that they're not uniform on the planet. As you said before, there are some regions that are more sensitive to the warming. These regions we call hotspots, climate change hotspots. In fact, this is a name that I started in a paper in 2006. There are many hotspots on the planet. I would say the most important one is the Arctic. As everybody knows, the Arctic is warming at a rate much, much faster than the global average. Over the last 150 years, globally, temperatures have increased 1.2 degrees, but over the Arctic, more than 3 degrees. And the reason is the feedback with the melting of the ice. There are other important hotspots, but one is exactly the Mediterranean. Mediterranean is perhaps the most important hotspot in the mid-latitudes regions. Why is this? Because one of the consequences of global warming is to deflect the trajectory of perturbations that bring the rain. In particular, one of these effects is to move these perturbations towards the poles. So perturbation that usually would bring rain over the Mediterranean, they will go north. This is something that actually is already happening. What this causes is a decrease of precipitation over the Mediterranean area, and the area is already relatively dry. So it would become even drier, while it pushes the storms over Central and Northern Europe, and these are regions already wet, and they will become even wetter. Of course, if the Mediterranean will be drier, there will be fewer clouds, lower evaporation, and so much higher temperature. In fact, also the Mediterranean is warming at a rate that is more than twice the global average. Over the last 100 years, for example, the Italian territory has warmed by 2.5 degrees. Compared to a global average of 1.2 degrees. And the whole Mediterranean region has warmed at this rate. So for us living in the Mediterranean, global warming is actually a very, very important phenomenon that may really affect very deeply our life. I think global warming will affect all of the socioeconomic sectors in our society. In my opinion, the one that, as you say, scares me more than others is the issue of water. One of the effects of global warming is what we call the intensification of the hydrologic cycle. What does it mean? In a warmer atmosphere, there is more energy, and the air can contain more water vapor because of a famous law called the Clausius-Clapeyron law. This means that when it rains, it tends to rain very intensely. So the intensity of rain tends to increase, and this is something that we are seeing pretty much all over the place. At the same time, it takes more time to reach the level of triggering the rain. So also the dry periods between rain events, they tend to become longer, and of course it's warmer, there are more heat waves, and this increases the risk of both flood and drought. So because we have more drought, of course we're going to have less water in a lot of regions, and the Mediterranean is one, Central America is another one, some parts of the Amazon basin are expected to be much drier, Southern Africa, for example. But at the same time, when we get the water, the rain, this comes very strongly, very intense. So not necessarily is good water. Sometimes it can be even more damaging than the drought. So in general, there will be less available water from rain. In addition, one of the big effects of global warming is to melt glaciers. And glaciers today are our main reservoirs of water. There's a lot of water on the planet, but we can use less than 2% of all the water that is on the planet. The rest is all salty water, so we cannot use it. Of this 2%, more than 60% is contained in glaciers. So melting the glaciers, which is something that is happening everywhere, particularly over the Alps, means that we will have less water available for us. So I personally think that water will be the most important, most precious item of this century. It will not be oil, it will not be gas, it will not be uranium. I think we are entering in an era of water scarcity, and many wars and many problems, I think, will be related to water. This is a $1 million question. If I knew the answer, I would win 10 Nobel Prizes. The real difficulty is, as you say, that global warming is a global problem, and everybody is contributing to it. So it's not sufficient that Europe decreases emissions, that the US decreases emissions, or that so-called advanced countries, industrially advanced countries, decrease emissions. Even more important is that the emerging countries start decreasing their use of fossil fuels. Today, China is the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide. India is the fastest growing one, and Africa, sooner or later, will have its development. So we expect big growth in this continent and so on. So the most important issue here is how can we do things in a way that these countries can develop, because they have the right to develop, but they can do it within the framework of what we call the green economy. This is the heart of the discussion at all the COPs meetings, and this is where the negotiations usually fail, because of course different countries have different objectives, different needs, and it's very difficult to get them all to work together. But the issue is mostly, I think, an exchange of technologies. So these countries have to be able to use these new sort of green technologies that are being developed in Europe, in the US, or also in China. China is becoming a leading country. And of course, these have to be transferred there at affordable costs. Otherwise, they cannot afford it. So this is the main issue. How do we do this? And this is usually where, since there are so many different interests, where the negotiations actually fail. So hopefully this will come from the bottom. This will come from the economy itself. The green economy is becoming very competitive, also from the economic point of view. So hopefully these countries will realize, like the Western countries are, that they can develop without using more fossil fuels. I think this is possible. Everybody thinks this is possible. It's just a matter of choice. It's not easy. A full energy conversion is not easy at all. It will take a little bit of time, although we have to start as soon as possible. But that's the way to go. That's the only way to solve the problem, because it's a global problem, and it doesn't help if only 1, 2, 3, 4 countries actually decrease their emissions. I think that's the only way. Today, let's say the technology related to the green economy is growing very fast. There are new discoveries every day, energy efficiencies, different materials, and so on. So I think this is the main way to go. We need to find cheap technologies that can be affordable, also more distributed, so that also people who live maybe in remote areas can actually use it, and distribute it at affordable prices. Honestly, I think it's doable, and again, it's a matter of choice. I don't know if they have taught something to us, but they should. What we learned, at least what I learned from this crisis, is that the dependency on energy sources, I think, is the main cause of wars. After the Second World War, I really believe that most of the wars that have been going on since then have been in one way or another related to oil, to gas, to resources related to the production of energy. So I think we really need to rethink this whole idea of how we produce energy. We need to do it in a more decentralized way, so it's more available to everyone. And decentralization from the ecosystemic point of view is not an element of vulnerability. It's an element of resilience. So I think the whole world would be more resilient if we decentralize the production of energy and make it more local. I think it's kind of crazy that we use gas that is produced 10,000, 15,000 kilometers away and has to travel all the way, from Russia from Eastern Russia to Europe. A lot of gas is lost in the process. A lot of energy is lost in the process, while we can produce locally a lot of solar energy, wind energy, and so on. So I think we really need to rethink entirely the way that energy is produced, is distributed, and is used, actually. We need to use energy more efficiently. Today, we waste about 60 to 65% of the energy that is produced, which I think is kind of crazy. The engine that our society uses is a very inefficient engine. One of the reasons for this is that the the combustion engines are much more inefficient than electric engines. So if we already electrified transport, industries, buildings, and so on, this would be already a big improvement in efficiency, regardless of how you produce the energy. Of course, if you produce this energy through renewables, then the whole circle, comes together. The whole energy system, I think, needs to be rethought, and this will also help in all this these wars and these tensions between countries. It is an interesting question, and this theory of nuclear winter is a theory that was born in the 80s. Actually, it was developed by a very, very famous, prominent scientist that I've personally worked with, Paul Crutzen, who actually got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for his research on the ozone hole. In the 80s, of course, we were still in the middle of the Cold War. So there was a lot of tension, and nuclear war was not considered to be an option, but was also, possible. And so I remember I used to work on this for my PhD dissertation. So we are talking about a few years ago. We tried to understand what would be the consequences on the global climate of the nuclear explosions, so all the dust that is emitted by the nuclear explosions, and especially of the smoke emitted by the fires that would be ignited by the explosions. There would be massive fires, forests, cities, and so on. This would emit a lot of dark smoke, and this smoke would block the sunlight from reaching the surface. So the surface would kind of fall into this dark and cold winter that was actually called nuclear winter, and would not be a very good environment to live in for the few people that would survive a major nuclear war. Interesting part is that, of course, after the Berlin Wall fell, the interest in this theory kind of subsided. I remember 1 week after the the fall of the Berlin Wall, my supervisor came to me and said, "Oh, we need to start working on something else." So we started working on global warming. That was becoming an important issue at the time. And for a few decades, there were no papers in the scientific literature on this. But recently, I noticed that there are some papers on nuclear winter coming back. And this is not a good sign, because it means that maybe people are thinking that, well, maybe not a major nuclear war, but still crazy, but a local, local regional nuclear war is possible, and this would still have major effects on the global climate. You asked me whether we will get there. I don't think humanity is so crazy to get into a major nuclear conflict, but of course, anything can happen. Mistakes can happen. Accidents can happen. We have seen what happened with Chernobyl. So we really have to be very careful about what's happening now in the world. Well, both have to go hand in hand. I usually condense this issue with the sentence, we need to manage the unavoidable and avoid the unmanageable. What does it mean? It means that even if we reach the target of the Paris Agreement, so the stabilization at 2 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures, that means 1 degree, less than 1 degree above actual temperatures, global temperatures. This will take some time. Even if we start this process of the decarbonization of the energy production, this will take a few decades. This means that climate will still warm for a few decades. This will have many impacts, more extreme events, glacier melting and the effect of water, effects on agriculture, sea level rise, of course, that's a very important one, because most of the population already lives in coastal areas, especially in the developing countries, Africa, Southeast Asia. There are these huge urban areas close to the coasts, and they're really very vulnerable to sea level rise. So we have to develop, as you said, adaptation strategies to deal with this. Now, these strategies are local strategies because the impacts of climate change are different in every part of the world. In coastal areas, of course, they care about sea level rise. Things like coastal barriers, making them higher, like they're doing in the Netherlands, for example, Bangladesh, and so on. Maybe in other mountainous areas, the issue is more related to loss of water because of glacier melting, for example, the water towers of the Himalayas. So these are all local response options that have to be done because climate is changing. So when you plan for something over the next 5, 10, 20 years, you have to account also for climate change. For example, climate change affects pollution because you have longer dry periods. So there's a buildup, for example, of particulate material. You have higher temperatures, so more ozone formation. So if you are developing some policy for reducing pollution, then you have to account that climate change will actually tend to increase it. So these are typical examples of adaptation options. At the same time, we have to we don't have to reach the danger level, this 2 degree, the famous, the Paris threshold is what we call the danger levels. It means going beyond these levels. There are some feedback processes, some irreversible processes that will start, like the melting of Greenland or weakening of the global ocean circulation. So if this happens, This means a total change in the world climate. It's like we live in a different planet, and nobody knows what this may imply. So we have to avoid this. This is really a huge risk that needs to be avoided through these mitigation options. And mitigation means reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The most important one concerns energy, but it's not the only one. There are other problems. Deforestation is a problem because forests, of course, absorb CO2. Today, it contributes about 11–12% to the current emissions. So at least stop deforestation and possibly start a reforestation process. Again, this is not a European problem. In Europe, we are reforesting Europe. This is more, as you know, the problem in tropical regions, in the pluvial forests are the ones that are disappearing. Of course, circular economy, very important. Reduce the waste, reuse materials. What we call a 0-kilometer economy. So, and this is something, of course, us as consumers can affect, because we can just read the labels of where the product we are buying is coming from. And if it's coming from 10,000 kilometers away, well, maybe it's better to buy it if they produce it, close to us. And finally, the food market. One of the important greenhouse gases is methane, and one of the largest sources of methane is production by herbivores. It's digestion of herbivores produces methane. So intensive farming related to excessive use of meat is actually a problem. So of course, we cannot all become vegetarian. But reducing the use of meat would be good, not only for our health, but also for the planet. Also because food means water. To produce 1 kilogram of meat, it takes about 15,000 liters of water, which is incredible. And in addition to sort of changing a little bit our diet, also to reduce the waste of food. Today, we waste about 30% of the food that is produced. There are a lot of campaigns against the waste of food that are going on in the world. And I think this is very important, because I think it's absurd that today many people still suffer of hunger, and we are wasting 30% of our food. So there are a lot of things that we can do. There are a lot of things that we have to do, because there's not one solution. As in many complex problems, you don't have one solution. You have many different areas where you can act, and if you put everything together, you can solve the problem. Well, at least keep it under control. Solve is a big word, but you can keep it under control. Reverse is a big word. I don't think we will ever be able to actually go back to pre-industrial conditions. Carbon sequestration is an option, of course. There are a number of pilot studies that are sort of evaluating how effective this is, especially from the energy viewpoint, because if you have to use more energy and so more CO2 production than the one you absorb from the atmosphere, then of course it doesn't work, because anything like this, if you want to have an impact, has to be done on a large scale. It's not enough to do it in 3, 4, 5, 10 pilot places, but you have to do it, a really huge scale. So we still have to see if this is an option. The main problem is that we cannot wait too long, because, one of the problems, people maybe don't realize this, because everybody thinks you have to go to zero emission by 2050. So this is a problem of 2050. In reality, it's not a problem of 2050. It's a problem of today. Why? Because greenhouse gases have a very long residence time in the atmosphere, especially CO2. After all the exchanges with the oceans, with the forests and so on average, CO2 molecules stay in the atmosphere for maybe 100 years, order of 100 years. And this means that everything we emit today will stay for many decades. And the CO2 concentration today is not determined by what we have emitted today, but is determined by what has happened in the last several decades. So it's something that is added up over the years. So the more we wait, the more we will have to have drastic sort of actions to reach the Paris target. A little bit like in the COVID situation. If some things had been done earlier, maybe we wouldn't have reached the lockdown. I would say that the situation is analogous. If we wait and if some technologies are still not ready, they have to be pursued, but we cannot count on these to reverse the problem. To reverse, the warming and the warming problem. I think we have technologies at hand that over the next 5-10 years can really help a lot in this, in containing global warming, and I'm talking about the green economy technologies. So my personal suggestion, my personal thought is that this is where we have to put our priority, explore other avenues, but the priority should be on what we today call the ecological transition. I think the time is now, to be honest. Until the 80s, I'm talking about, of course, I'm limiting my considerations to the climate problem, not to other problems. Of course, there are many other problems that we shouldn't have reached stage where we are now. But concerning the climate problem, until the 80s, the 90s, the evidence was not yet strong enough to force us to do something. But today we know it. Okay, today maybe we are the first generation that has the consciousness that we are changing the global environment. You might have heard the word Anthropocene. Actually, a word invented also by Paul Crutzen, who was truly a brilliant mind. Anthropocene means that today we know that we can and are inadvertently modifying the planet. The climate of the planet. And since we now know it and we know what are the possible consequences, if we want to safeguard the future generations, we need to make some important choices today. This is the time where we cannot afford to make a mistake. We cannot afford to wait because we know we have a choice to follow a virtuous path or not a virtuous path, to think about our own immediate gain and kind of keep doing what we are doing, and then our children and grandchildren will suffer, or to go the other direction. Because, I really think it's an ethical problem as well, because climate has this long memory. What we do today will be felt for many decades, will be felt by my children, by their children, but they have no choice now. They have no way of contributing to our cultural, our socioeconomic choice. So we have also this ethical problem that we are responsible for them, and we have to care for the future of the next generations. We cannot wait. I would say that today, since we know we have the consciousness, today is the turning point. This is a good question. Communication has been a problem, I would say, among the scientific community. Concerning the skeptics, to be honest, I think you will never be able to convince the skeptics because their skepticism is not based on science, I think, at least for most of them. It's based on something else, on some conspirational ideas or some strange, I've heard all sorts of strange ideas. And it's like people who believe that Earth is flat. You will never convince them that it's not the case because whatever. I mean, they're really irrational thoughts. So I don't think The problem is to convince the skeptics. There are many fewer skeptics than people think, but the skeptics are very vocal, but there are not really many of them. You know, people think that the scientific community is divided between yes and no. This is absolutely not true. If you ask, 1,000 scientists working on climate change issues, actually working on it, 999 will have a consensus, okay, maybe even 1,000, because the evidence is there, it cannot be denied. But still there are scientists in other fields that for whatever reason, they are so-called skeptics, and the same is in the population. So I don't think we can convince them, and I don't think we should waste our time trying to convince them, because it's impossible. What I really think is that we have to improve the consciousness of the young people, because they're still, open, okay, in schools, in dissemination, and something that we have failed because partly also because of age, I have to say, the new ways of communication, social media, influencers, rock stars, whatever. I mean, there are ways, I think, that are much better than giving a scientific talk in some ways, trying to convince, especially the young generations, because, they're really the ones who are going to suffer the most. And they have to know this. They have to realize the risk they are taking. So I would say this is where we should go. We shouldn't waste our time trying to convince a few skeptics around. There will always be skeptics for whatever reason. They will always be vocal for whatever reason. This usually sometimes has a political connotation, sometimes has a, some lobbying interest or whatever. So you cannot change this. Let's put our effort in making people, educating people, young people, to science, and to have faith in science, because a lot of people, as you say, mistrust science for reasons that to me are not very much comprehensible, I have to say. Science is science. We scientists, if there is one thing we try to do, is to be objective as much as possible. Of course, there are uncertainties in science. We recognize that, but if the data is there, the data is there. Mathematics is not an opinion, as Pythagoras said, or somebody said. We need to educate these young people. We need to reach out to them. Obviously, I would say we have not been very good at doing this. Probably there needs to be a new professional figure to actually do this in a more effective way. Somebody who knows the new communication tools, the socials or whatever. I would be terrible at this. I don't even have a Facebook. I don't use socials at all because, I come from another generation, let's put it this way. But this is an area that, for example, the IPCC is working on. They're developing an office that is devoted to communications, with the new forms of communication with younger people, which is always good. And this is, I think, where we should put our efforts. Skeptics will always be there, as in everything. We have seen it with COVID, we have seen it with everything. And, that's human nature, I guess. And no point in wasting too much time on them. Okay, first of all, let me say that it's not only global warming. Global warming puts together a number of environmental crises that are around the corner. Air pollution. Air pollution today is the third biggest killer in the world. Some studies have shown that about 7-8 million people every year die of premature death because of pollution. Water pollution, we have seen, the issue of plastics and so on. Deforestation, soil degradation. Soil has become less and less fertile. There are many different environmental problems, all come together into, one might say, a perfect storm in some ways. I mean, as you said, I don't want to sound too dramatic, but I do think that the biggest crisis we will have in this century are not going to be political crises, are not going to be economic crisis. The economy has its waves, it goes up and down. And okay, if you can ride the wave, you can survive. But this environmental crisis are there to stay for the long term if we don't do something soon. So I don't want to say humanity will survive or not. I think if we don't do something and we don't start doing something soon, if we don't change our cultural approach to the environment, we cannot see humans on one side and what we call nature on another side. And human uses nature because of whatever. Human is part of nature, so we have to learn how to be in harmony, to follow the rhythm of the planet, and this is a scientific fact. I mean, I'm saying it from the scientific viewpoint, not from a holistic or if you don't change this culture, I think we are bound to have some big problems. And as you said, everything is interconnected. If we have a big drought in Australia, the price of corn will go up, and then we'll have a revolution in Mexico or somewhere else. And this will happen more and more if we are not careful. And if there is something that we learned from the COVID, at least I learned from COVID, is how vulnerable our society is. After all, COVID, was not the past Manzonis, where people were dying in the street, in these terrible ways. Yes, it was a bad illness. Many people died, but we could have coped with it if we had been ready. COVID actually hit one socioeconomic sector, the hospitals and so on, and society stopped. This was really incredible if you think about it. It was actually incredible. And things like climate change, pollution will affect not just one sector, will affect all the sectors. So you ask me, will humanity survive with the society the way it's going right now? I honestly think that some doubt comes. I don't want to say we will not survive or not, but definitely there is a big risk. Otherwise, believe me, we will not be there saying, let's do a major energy conversion, because this is something so major that there needs to be a very strong reason behind. And the reason behind is that there is a big risk in a society that is vulnerable, because our society, you see how many crises we have. And fortunately, they come one, then that one ends, and then there's another one. In this case, you would have many crises together. Environmental crisis, climate crisis, energy crisis, economic crisis, all together. Will we survive? Some doubts is there. But, we have to believe in the survival, instinct of the human race. We haven't killed ourselves with nuclear weapons, at least not yet. We could have made a sort of species suicide in several occasions during the past history, and we haven't done it because at the end, maybe some very intelligent person comes up, or some group, or some conscience, something, and we have survived. So I'm hopefully that we will survive this one as well, and that we will be able to take the right path to a better future, because really what I'm worried about is not about myself. I've done my life and I've done what I had to do. But I have two children, I mean, they're grown-ups. Hopefully I will have some grandchildren, and I really want that they have the best possible planet, at least a planet that is as good as the one I inherited. So we have to do all we can for this.